Right. So I'm glad you laid all that out, Danny. I guess one of the things that it seems to me from the Biden administration is maybe not everybody is on the same page, or they don't have this all 100% figured out yet. As you point out, we have this infantry battalion guarding the embassy in Kabul, and eventually maybe they're going to have to answer the question of what are they going to do if rockets start coming near that embassy, or the Taliban starts taking territory near that embassy. I suppose there's ways that the U.S. could diplomatically negotiate it to keep that embassy in place and find some way to coexist with the Taliban. But at the same time, we have our Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, saying that the Taliban will become a pariah. Afghanistan will be a pariah state if the Taliban take control by force. And so that sounds to me like the U.S. may be looking for a maximum pressure campaign or something like that. Um, I guess I'm curious if you have any ideas on maybe who in the Biden administration is really. Do you think like Biden himself really is trying to end this thing? And it seems like the airstrikes have really ticked up since the command of the war has shifted from Afghanistan in the Bagram Air Base, where I guess it was General Scott Miller, to now General Kenneth McKenzie, the head of
Right.
CENTCOM.
That raises a lot of interesting questions. Some of them are unknowable, but we can guess and we can sort of extrapolate a bit. So I think, and this is just an opinion, I do think Joe Biden himself, instinctually, gut player, all that stuff, really doesn't like the war in Afghanistan and hasn't for a long time. In the Obama administration, he was pretty good on this. Well, he was the best as far as they went, in terms of the primaries, the top tier inside the administration. As early as 2009, he's telling Obama, do not surge. Barack Obama is the first black president, a supposed liberal, a supposed anti war guy who gets the Nobel Peace Prize, but he tripled the number of American troops in Afghanistan in his first year. George Bush couldn't pull that off. That was an enormous escalation of this war. Um, Biden was against that. I've been critical of Biden on almost every single foreign policy issue in his entire career. And I've been told that because I do that, that I therefore love Donald Trump and hate all minorities or something. Like, it's crazy the amount of like backlash you get when you criticize a guy like Joe Biden. So for me to say this is not because I'm a Biden bro, but on Afghanistan, I think he's been pretty good. I
Right.
don't trust the people around him. Um, so far, he seems to have like held off against a lot of the pressure coming from things like the Afghan Study Group, which is full of generals and war industry shills. He held off pressure from folks like that who were advising him to stay. But you do have people like my friend and yours, Jake Sullivan, as his national security advisor, who is more in the Clintonian mold, the interventionist mold. He's also a mind melder. He's also very good at being close to the throne, and pleasing his boss and being what his boss wants and making himself indispensable. So I don't know what he's doing or saying. What I do know is he and his ilk are more prone to arguments about staying, maintaining what they always call a residual force. I can't stand that phrase. I mean, that's just another way of saying like small forever war rather than big forever war. I mean, it's I don't know what's happening inside the administration. There's been a decent amount of discipline in a certain sense compared to some of like what was going on in the Obama administration. Like, there hasn't been quite as many leaks. There have been some. Um, there were those reports that were coming out from certain sources that we were going to maintain some sort of force there, that we were going to maintain a high degree of airstrikes, and then there were some corrections kind of put out by the spokespeople at the White House saying, no, 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 that's not true. So it does. So we don't know exactly what's going on inside, but I will say that this could be a bit of Biden against the world, even inside his own administration. And yeah, he's the decider, but he is nothing if not a political animal. He proved that with the Iraq story earlier this week when he said, we're ending combat operations, but ... Actually, the troops are pretty much staying. We're just going to reclassify them as advisors and trainers. On Iraq, he's been terrible. On Afghanistan, he's been pretty good. So in some ways, this is in line with his instincts. But I think his administration is full of people who are more inclined to the Hillary Clinton worldview of how we should handle a problem like Afghanistan than to his own view instinctually that may not be highly thought out, analytical, and intellectual, but is generally correct in its instincts. And ironically, this is an issue where him and Donald Trump aren't that far apart,
Right. I
right?
actually want to
They're,
ask you about that because I was thinking that as you were saying it, and in one sense, you would almost think Biden maybe has a leg up on Trump here because Trump, I think people calling him an idiot is maybe too dismissive. I mean, the guy became president, like he has some abilities to do some things, but I don't think one of his skills was navigating the American bureaucracy whatsoever. Yeah, people in his administration were people who opposed him running, right? Like never Trumper types. John Bolton ends up with a position. H.R. McMaster ends up as his national security advisor, where Biden at least should see this coming, maybe a little bit. Like, but that maybe depends on what his cognitive abilities are, or and also maybe Trump, brought in some Rex Tillerson type figures, which weren't, I don't think, as much of a swamp creature as, let's say, a Jade Sullivan. Not that he doesn't end up bringing in like Mike Pompeo eventually, but still, I think there are some swampier creatures that came in with Biden that maybe Trump didn't bring in all of the Bush people, but it is very interesting that Trump ends up with the neocon problem, and now it seems that Biden has the Clinton problem.
yeah. So Trump comes in with a neocon weight kind of like tied to his leg, weighing him down, and Trump comes and Biden comes in with a neoliberal problem. And of course, like they're not that different when it comes to an issue like Afghanistan. They're just not.
Right.
That's interesting. That's an interesting analogy. Mark Esper, Pompeo, Bolton, H.R. McMaster, these guys are problems. They want to stay in Afghanistan forever, or they're willing to. Well, Biden has a lot of people like that around him as well, the Clintonian types. Both of their instincts are kind of correct, but I think that Biden does have a bit of a leg up. One of them is he gets a better shake from the media. They are, every day you open up the newsletter that comes to your inbox, in my case, and in many people's cases from the Washington Post and the New York Times, for my sins. And I just like see what they're writing about. What is the establishment writing about? What are the opinion columnists and the guest opinion columnists writing about? And every day the stories on Afghanistan from those two major papers are about the same. They're Chicken Little, sky is falling, America leaving is the biggest disaster. Like, oh my goodness. They may say it overtly in some cases, they may imply it in others. They do that with Biden, but they're less on the attack of him personally. They hint that Biden's decisions on Afghanistan to pull out might turn out disastrously. But if it was Trump, and when it was Trump, they called him out by name. And they implied that he was actually like in bed with the Russians who were putting bounties on our heads, and that he was like rolling over for the Taliban. And, they were questioning him personally, like his character, his level of treason, the implication. So Biden gets a better shake from the media. Biden gets a better shake from Congress, largely, because the thing about Joe Biden is that he has some loyalty from the left, obviously, vaguely defined, from the Democratic Party. But to the extent that they still exist, like the leftover sort of like moderate establishment hawkish Republicans, they also don't hate him all that much either. I mean, they may like make a show of it and say things, but he knows those guys and he knows how to navigate the Congress. Now, his cognitive ability always remains an open question at his age and some of the strangeness that's gone on. But it seems like, unlike Obama, he's been able to like push off the generals a little bit. Obama got steamrolled by his generals. Fact. Biden warned him about it. The insider accounts have said that Biden said to him in 2009, like, don't let these guys push you around. They're going to give you 3 options, and they're all going to be bad. And they're going to say these are the only 3 options. Don't let it do it. They may even leak some stuff, and they did, right? They leaked their plans saying, like, and it pissed Obama off. Like, he was kind of like Kennedy, where afterwards, he was like, felt like he'd been duped and was like, you got to be careful with the generals kind of thing. But at the time, he got steamrolled. Biden seems to have avoided that. And I think it's partly because he gets a better shake from Congress and he gets a better shake from the media. Trump was doomed. The best thing that Biden has going from him on Afghanistan is that he's not Trump. Like Biden's allowed to end the war in Afghanistan. Like he's allowed to at least kind of end the war. If Trump does it, he hates America. He loves the Taliban. He's doing Putin's bidding. He's an idiot, right? He doesn't understand anything. I think that Biden's number one asset on a number of issues, including Afghanistan, is that he's not Donald Trump, and that raises some serious questions about the American political space.
So, before I move on, because I do want to get into like the media coverage of it and what they're trying to do to change the narrative to get us to stay, I want to ask about the Afghan military. One of the things I thought that was really disingenuous that Biden did during his press conference is he was like, "We spent all this money, we built this, or we should have built this great military and state for the Afghans, and if it falls apart, it's their own damn fault. You know, stupid people can't manage their own stuff. We set it all up for them. Perfect thing. And, these idiots didn't listen to the training. They came in and they botched everything. And so if the state falls apart, it's not the Americans' fault, but it seems to me, Danny, that can't be the case. And so it may be very soon that the Biden administration kind of has to address or at least acknowledge that the Afghan military is falling apart. I think from the most recent SIAGR, the Special Investigative General for Afghan Reconstruction report, he says something like only 37% of the helicopters are functional, and I'm guessing there's still or at least pretty recently was some American help maintaining those helicopters. So what's going to happen when apparently all the American contractors leave? I mean, I heard reports that they're talking about taking these things to Qatar to repair them. I mean, that seems absolutely absurd. I look at a map of the Middle East. That seems like a long way to move a helicopter for standard maintenance. But so what's the plan here?
I mean, that the helicopter thing is one of the anecdotal and instructive pieces. Turns out Afghanistan is landlocked, always has been. Also turns out that it's really hard to win wars in landlocked countries where there's a safe haven across a border for the insurgents. Historians call that fortified compound warfare and have concluded that it's almost impossible to win those wars. America, though, isn't really big on worrying about such things. We could do anything, right? But the truth is that in those kind of fights, in landlocked, mountainous countries where the majority of the population actually lives in rural areas and there's a lot of remote districts that are being contested, the ability to do fixed-wing airstrikes and the ability to use helicopters to both move troops in and move casualties out and move supplies in and, move soldiers around, that's vital, just at a tactical level, right? Just to win the war, to even maintain any control over this vast and disparate country is going to require these helicopters and planes. Oops, they're completely reliant on American logistics and American contractors to do like the maintenance. So this whole idea that America is not complicit at all in the failures of the Afghan security forces is like utterly dismissive of Afghan agency, right? And just disingenuous. One of the problems is that the United States never really knew what it was trying to do. It could never really decide what it wanted the Afghan security forces to be. It changed over and over again. In the beginning, it was like, well, we'll empower the warlords. We'll like let them kind of like become official military forces. We'll overlook some of their war crimes and like ethnic chauvinism. Then it was like, no, we're going to create an Afghan army in our own image, that looks just like ours. Well, maybe the Afghan army doesn't need to look just like the United States military. Maybe it has a different mission. Maybe what it's for, right? You always want that question, what is something for, right? At root. Maybe it wasn't for what ours is for. I mean, if to the extent we know what ours is for anymore. And we enabled a lot of the corruption, the ghost soldiers, the officers stealing money from soldiers that are on the books but don't exist in real life. We turned our head to a lot of that corruption. And American advisors and trainers are not innocent in this. Afghans know how to fight, right? They're known for it. It's not just the Taliban. The people who are in the Afghan security forces, I've seen them fight. They're not all cowards or something. They're not just incompetents. The question is, what do they feel they have to fight for? You know, one of the problems with the Afghan security forces has always been one of legitimacy. Same thing goes for the whole Kabul government. The Taliban, for all their monstrosity that they often display, is fighting for something. They can tell their recruits, you are fighting and dying as the resistance to occupation and the resistance to the corrupt Kabul government, which is really just a lackey of the United States. That resonates. People will die for that. These Afghan soldiers, it's a little bit more squishy because the Kabul government really kind of is an American stooge, American produced. So is the Afghan military. They also realized that even after 20 years, they weren't left with the capacity indigenously, like their own capacity domestically to like run this thing themselves, to fund it themselves, and to be self-sustainable. And so they don't necessarily have the motivation, the will, or the belief that they could win, which is why we are starting to see some of these mass defections and mass surrenders, because they just, it's not that Afghans don't know how to fight and aren't willing to fight. It's just that they're willing to fight for certain things and not for others. They're not stupid. And I think a lot of them see the writing on the wall, and they're more worried about protecting their own ethnic groups, communities, regional areas. And the Kabul government remains an abstraction that is tainted by its association with the United States.
Right. So